Hey, what's up, everyone? So I'm tying a fly for you today that is inspired from a trip that I just took this past week. We were on the Green River in northern Utah, below Flaming Gorge, and the fishing was great. Super crowded. I haven't been there in probably 10 years, and it is way crowded, way more crowded than I've ever seen. Guides, rafters. I remember it being busy, but nothing like I've seen this last week. So Section A was pick your spots, and most of our damage was done with a little dropper underneath some small foam stuff. We fished a mystery meat, we fished some little caddis, that kind of stuff. We did get into matching the hatch, which was a lot of fun on the tail outs, fishing PMDs and some little Yellowstones. That was cool. But I think the highlight for me was a day that we spent, or an afternoon that we spent on Section B. We floated A and B, and Section B doesn't really have the bugs that Section A does. There's a little bit of a hatch down there, but not much. The big deal down there is terrestrials, crickets and cicadas. And we hadn't seen any cicadas. We hadn't seen any crickets either, but word on the street, shout out to Easton at the Flaming Gorge Resort, who gave us this little tip, said throw big foam. There's crickets out and those fish will eat it. Don't throw sixes or eights. He said fours, twos, as big as you can throw. Well, I didn't have much that big, but I had a couple of Mondo cicadas that were, I think they were a 4 or 2, just an all black fly. And after we looked at it, we're like, well, they might eat it, but it's a little bit crazy for what we're trying to do here. So we cut it, took the scissors to it, and started throwing it, and they were on it. If you threw like an 8 or a 6, you wouldn't get hits. They'd maybe come look at it, but they wouldn't eat it. But if you threw a big 4, 2, plopped it down, now they're just attacking the thing. Vicious stuff. So I came home and I tied up the fly that I really wanted to be fishing, these Fat Alberts. I love this fly, and I had fished it, but the ones that I had just weren't big enough. So I came back and I started tying them in. I think this is a 4. I'm going to do some 4s and 2s, but I thought I'd show you my version of a Fat Albert tied Mormon cricket style. And if you haven't, like, Google what a Mormon cricket looks like. Crazy looking bugs. You could do this. I've chosen like a really dark olive black combination, but you could also do this in all black, and I'm sure it would work. So let me tie one up for you. I hope you enjoy. This is my Fat Albert Mormon cricket variation. Let's get started. We're going to start with the size 4 streamer hook. This is a 3X long, extra heavy wire, and for tying big foam flies, extra heavy wire is a good idea because you're going for big fish, big blow-ups, aggressive takes. I'm going to use a Danville 210 denier thread. I'm going to wrap it all the way up and down the shank of the hook, try and create a nice solid underbody. You could substitute UTC 140, but what you really are looking for is a multi-filament thread that you can spin the bobbin counterclockwise and separate the fibers in the thread. You can kind of see it a little bit there. The reason you want a multi-filament thread is because when you're tying with foam, it has less of a tendency to cut through the foam. I'm going to put a little bit of super glue on this, not much, just a couple dabs. And I'm going to take 2 pieces of foam. So I cut these 2 strips. You can see they're pretty good sized strips. I cut them from just a regular craft foam. One is a dark olive brown and the other is a black. I'm gonna just kind of cut the edges off those just to make them a little bit easier to tie in. Gives my thread a little bit something, a little bit of an easier spot to grab. I'm gonna lay these on top of the hook, black down, because that's gonna become the over body. The olive brown is gonna be my second underbody. You'll understand that here in a minute. So I'm gonna start, see how it makes it easier for me to catch those. I'm gonna just wrap down, and I'm doing a pretty snug wrap, but you can see how this multi-filament thread is not cutting through the foam. That is a super important thing when you are tying foam flies is to get thread that doesn't slice it, because nothing is more frustrating than cutting through your foam when you're tying with foam stuff. So now I'm just going to kind of lock that in. I got it where I wanted it. And now I'm going to go through and lock it in. Now, on the versions that I've seen other folks tie, a lot of folks will cover that whole hook shank or cover all of that foam with their thread. I'm actually going to tie in another piece of foam here to cover my body with. I like to have really high floating flies, and I just think this adds to it. I'm angling. This is a little bit smaller strip because I'm going to wrap this, and because this is a Mormon cricket version, a big version, I want this body to be really bulky. So now I'm going to just a couple more little dabs of super glue. You don't want to overdo the super glue, because if that shows through the foam, or if it gets on the foam on the outside where you can see it, on darker color foam, it will discolor it. So now I'm going to wrap this loosely. Now remember, I've got the super glue there holding it as well. And I'm butting each wrap up to the previous wrap. I'm not over wrapping. I don't want it to sit on top of any of the previous wraps. I want it just right next to it. I'm come right up, all the way up to the eye. Right there. Okay, trim all that foam away. So at this point, I'm going to, you can either hit it with a half hitch or a whip finish. I'll do a quick whip. I'm going to take my thread back to this segment, the first segment there, and I'm going to start it again right on that first segment. And I'm just kind of going in between where that foam wrap was. Then I'm going to take my first layer of olive brown that I had tied in there, and I'm going to overwrap it. This is essentially a first overbody that's going over the top of my wrapped foam. Let me give my thread another spin. 2, 3. Come up underneath. 1, 2, and then lock it in. 1, 2, 3. Come up underneath. 2, lock it in. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's what we have so far. And there's your underbody. You can see that thread kind of adds to the segmentation of it. Now we're going to take this black chunk of foam and bring it over the top. And 1, 2, 3. But now the main thing you'll notice here is the bulk of that body. I have taken a piece of olive rubber leg that actually left 2 strands together. I'm going to take that and tie it into a knot to use as the rubber leg. So I'm just going to knot it. Pull that knot snug, just like that. And the idea here is cricket legs. So I'm going to put that kind of angled like a cricket leg, and I want that knot to be right at the end of the fly. So we'll do that again. Take my next same piece here, tie a little overhand knot. Sorry, let me get that in frame. And trim. We're going to tie that the length of the body. Now, if you have trouble like guessing what it looks like, that's where that rotary vise is nice. You can turn it and get a really good idea. I want this just below the black on the olive, so I'm going to check that a few times. So the next thing we're going to do is tie in a piece of this is dun colored parapost wing. It's basically a poly yarn. We're going to tie that right there. Just adds a little bit of bugginess to the fly, makes it that much more appealing, maybe makes it a little easier to see, but you'll see what I really do for that in a second. A little crystal flash. We're just trying to give this all a little bit of fancy. This is probably more for me than the fish. They're might not even see any of this, but I like it and it fishes well. So obviously this wing does not look right. It's standing straight up. So I'm going to tie in a little cider on the top. Cider, like something you can see. And this is going to help lay that poly wing down and the crystal flash. But it's also a super important part of this fly. And I'll tell you why in just a second. Now I'm going to bring all of this back, advance my thread on the top underneath to the next little notch in the foam. Then I'm going to take all 3 pieces of thread, not the rubber legs, and I'm going to capture those right on top of that notch. Okay. So this little orange cider is important because if you're fishing this and with big foam, there's a tendency for it to land upside down or sideways. And if you give it a little twitch, it'll straighten itself out. But you don't know if you're fishing 50 feet away, 60 feet away. It's hard to tell if it's sideways or not. But this little orange foam, you always know. As soon as it hits, you'll go, oh, that's not it because I don't see the orange. But then you twitch it and you see the orange. And if it's sitting right, it's really obvious to you. So the orange on there is super important to me tying these flies. I cut another doubled up piece of rubber legs, and all of these rubber legs are 2 strands together. And I'm going to come in and tie that in right where I tied in the cider foam. Do another doubled up piece of rubber leg and tie that in on the other side. We'll flip it so you can see it. I'm trying to get it right on the brown overlay. I don't want it on the black. I want it right on the brown. And we are basically done. I'm going to pull all of this mess back, and I'm going to come up and build a nice clean head in front. With this much foam, it doesn't really matter how much thread you're using there. You just want to get it looking good, get it all locked in. Take my whip finisher and put a nice little whip finish on this thing. Pull everything back and give it a good whip finish. Trim. I'm going to take these 2 pieces of foam and cut them about even with the eye. And I like to give it a little bit of shape. So I'm going to just angle it. Be careful not to hit your rubber legs. Since I used doubled up rubber legs, I'm actually going to come in and split them. And now I've got all kinds of movement in this fly. As this is floating down the river, I want to be able to cast it 60 feet away from the boat, have it drift, make long drifts, and without me twitching it, without me doing anything to the fly, these rubber legs are just going to go crazy. Any little micro currents, and these things are moving all over the place. So that's it. That's my Mormon cricket style Fat Albert. Last little steps, I'm going to hit all of this thread with some super glue. One little thing to be careful of. When you are applying super glue anywhere near foam, especially dark colored foam, you have to be a little bit careful. That's too much. You have to be a little bit careful of getting the super glue on the foam. If you get it all over the foam, it kind of discolors it. So that's it. Hope this helps some of you, especially if you're in Idaho or Utah or any of those places that has those big Mormon crickets. Yeah, so I'm anxious to get out there and give this a fish, see how it works.